Hey everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day, and we are here in Seneca Falls, New York, right here at a beautiful new statue called the Ripples of Change. And I'm here next to Harriet Tubman, and this statue is here dedicated to sort of pioneers of the women's suffrage movement in America that have been somehow a little bit overlooked. And in that spirit, I brought a couple books today that came right into the sort room that were written by women who not only have been overlooked, but both of whom established businesses that would be run by for women in a time in which women were largely confined to the domestic sphere. And their stories are really interesting. So let's get right to it, shall we?
Okay.
The first person I want to talk about today, Cathy, is a woman by the name of Amanda Jones. And I happen to have her biography, which we will get to in just a moment. But let me tell you a little bit about Amanda Jones. She was born right here in upstate New York, a little bit west of Seneca Falls, where we are. And at an early age, she started writing poetry, and she was noticed by national magazines and eventually would publish several collections of poetry. But she also developed tuberculosis, and she went west for a special cure. And that cure was something called the air cure. And if you know anything about Victorian medicine, you'll know that the air cure was when you would get inside a sort of metal tank, and the doctor would pump in compressed air.
Wow.
And the idea was that exposure to oxygen would help you heal. Well, it was inside of one of these tanks, most likely, that Amanda Jones had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that she was going to create a new process for canning food.
Wow.
In which food would become vacuum sealed. And this time, instead of pumping the oxygen in, her method was to pump the oxygen out.
Wow.
Because at this time in American history and world history, for the most part, canned food was pre-cooked, mushy, disgusting, sold in tin cans, nothing that you'd want to eat. They hadn't developed a canning process for things like fresh fruit, and that's what Amanda Jones was interested in preserving. So she established what was called the Jones process, which was basically the vacuum sealing of canned fruit that we use today.
Wow.
And she established several patents for that process, and is one of a number of 19th century women that were actual patent holders. She held many different patents.
Neat.
But one of the things that I like most about Amanda Jones was that wasn't enough. She decided that she was going to establish a woman-owned and run and organized business that was going to revolutionize Chicago canning by establishing basically a women's canning and basically jarring company in Chicago. And this is what she said. If you look here in the book, she says, "This is to be a women's industry. No man will vote our stock, transact our business, keep our books, pronounce on women's wages, supervise our factories, give me whatever work is suitable, but keep the governing power. This is a business training school for working women. You with all the rest. Here's the mission. Let it be fulfilled." All this they understood. They pledged themselves. They laughed for the joy of it. So that's Amanda Jones, and it was a pretty interesting business. She would go on to do a number of other patents, including one for a more economically burning oil lamp. But I showed you this book already. Did you notice the title of the book, Cathy? It's called A Psychic Autobiography, which makes it even a little bit more interesting than you might think. As there she is, by the way. You open it up and you see that it's got a little introduction by the head of the American Society for Psychical Research. And, well, this is where it gets interesting. When you start reading about Amanda Jones, you realize that all of her inventions, all of her patents, and all of her poetry were actually composed by other people speaking through her as a medium.
Wow.
Would you like to guess, and I find this quite amusing, would you like to guess which founding father who has appeared in Buy Day before actually wrote Amanda Jones's Civil War poetry?
Wow. I have no idea.
Okay. Well, she didn't either, because she hadn't seen him until he appeared to her. It's John Adams.
Wow.
Somewhat surprisingly. I did not know that I had seen a picture of him, but I found one later after search. Let there be no mistaking me. I saw John Adams. Oh, I cannot write it, but one was there who would not be denied. I think the next two lines were altogether his, so I rebelled against them. John Adams, writing Civil War poetry. And when it came to the canning, that was also something that came to her in a vision. She woke up one day and I see how fruit can be canned without cooking it. The air must be exhausted from the cells and fluid made to take its place. The fluid must be airless, a light syrup of sugar and water. That or the juice of the fruit. Now let me say it once. No spirit told me this. No! But you had to have your mind open to be able to receive these visions. And that was Amanda Jones. There's some great titles in this psychic autobiography. It really makes for incredibly interesting reading. And I hope people will now know a little bit more and want to learn more about the story. Now, the second story I wanted to highlight today takes place on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. I wanted to go to England and talk about a reformer who pretty much at the same time was doing amazing things for women. In what trade of all trades? The printing trade.
Excellent.
And I have here what, for all intents and purposes, came into the sort room as a gift book. A gift book called Victoria Regia. And as you can see, it had some, Thackeray in it. So somebody did it. It's bound in Morocco. It's got a beautiful Revere binding. But what makes it interesting is that it was printed and published by Emily Faithfull at the Victoria Press for the Employment of Women in 1861.
Oh, neat.
And Emily Faithfull decided, and there, by the way, is the emblem for the press. Isn't that sort of
yes.
pretty? She decided that she would dedicate herself to finding employment for women outside of the domestic sphere, specifically for women in the printing trades. And at that time, the printing trades were, for the most part, the domain of men. In fact, typesetters and others were almost entirely a male profession. But Emily Faithfull decided that she could change this, and she would show by creating her own press and her own books and her own publications that women could be compositors just like men. Now, this met great resistance from the trade unions in England, but it was provable. Interestingly, in America, we'd already had a number of great female printers, including people like Jane Aiken in Philadelphia or Mary Catherine Goddard in Baltimore. But in England, it was pretty closely guarded by the trades that were all male. But Emily Faithfull put this together and designed the book. And this book became an ode to Queen Victoria and then an example, Cathy, of what women could in fact do, because all the tail pieces and all the initials and all the designs, as well as all the typesetting, were all done by women in her employ. And for the most part, these women were under 16 years old. So it was these were young women looking for their first jobs in the workforce. And isn't it a beautiful book?
It is.
And it's fascinating. We can go to the end and you can see the colophon at the end, which also says printed by Emily Faithfull and Company. Now, this is her demonstration book, and it got the notice of all people, Queen Victoria, who told Emily that she would be her own personal printer.
Oh, neat.
That was a bit of an honor. And Emily Faithfull's press was written up in things like the London Illustrated News and everywhere else. But what a remarkable, remarkable book.
Lovely.
To walk into the scholar. And again, one that talks about a business that was owned, operated, and run by women. All right. Well, we're going to end here at Seneca Falls with a funny book. Are you ready for a funny book? This one just came in. I found it amusing, and I think everyone here would find it amusing, fairly certain. It is Men to Avoid in Art and Life. It is, in fact, an entire book about how, for the most part, the great pieces of conversation pieces of sort of American and world art largely have to do with nothing more than mansplaining. So it is one picture after another of the great works of art in which men are basically explaining things to women who are either incredulous or rather bored. I like them all. My favorite one is by an artist I actually like, an American artist, Daniel Huntington. Here it is. They've added captions for effect, but this is called Philosophy in Art, and the philosopher is clearly saying something, and the artist is clearly saying, but come on. Mansplaining in art. Men to avoid in art and life, and at all costs. I think we could all do a little bit of that. Well, we're going to walk a little bit around Seneca Falls, then we're heading over to Wells College. More on that, hopefully, at a future buy day. I thank you for watching here in the snow. I hope you'll watch next Friday and every Friday at noon for more adventures in the world of books.